Now, to conclude this module, I'd like to focus on some criticisms of the propaganda model. Now, I think it's important from the outset to say that while these criticisms are really valid and very important when considering the effectiveness of the propaganda model as a way of critiquing the relationship between media and political power, I don't think any of the criticisms that I'm about to take us through entirely or fully discredit the model, but rather they should lead us to take the propaganda model with a bit of a grain of salt to modify our expectations and understandings of it in a way that is a little more nuanced and sophisticated along the lines of what it is that we're trying to do in CCB 101. The first criticism of the propaganda model is that when you boil it down to its basics, it's really nothing more than a conspiracy theory. Now, I mentioned this at the very start of the module, and I think if you've been following along, it's probably fairly apparent that that kind of conspiracy theory approach really does burst through the propaganda model at various times. So really, when you boil it down, when you break the propaganda model down to its very basic premises, it's really saying nothing more than commercial media, government, business, those big institutions are inherently oppressive. It's just in their nature for commercial media, government, big business to be kind of inherently autocratic and oppressive. And these institutions, along with the media, just simply work together to ensure that their needs are served. Now, if that was really the case, if there was some sort of conspiracy, if you like, between the media and the government and business to manipulate the media in that kind of conspiratorial way, then, very basically you could ask the following questions. Why would we have media laws and regulation? And in Australia, why would we have public service and community media if the relationship between the media, the government, and business was conspiratorial? So the fact that we do have media law and regulation, the fact that we do have public service and community media in Australia should cast some doubt on that idea that the media, in its relationships with the government and with other social institutions, work in tandem in kind of a conspiracy to dupe us, the audience, into accepting their vision of reality or their version of reality. Now, in response to this, Herman and Chomsky argue that the propaganda model only represents a theory of how the commercial media tries to work or how the commercial media tries to exert power. They don't argue, and they stress this, they don't argue that the commercial media is always successful in operating through the 5 filters that we've discussed in this module so far. So Herman and Chomsky argue that the propaganda model is a theory of how the commercial media tries to exert power, not that it is always successful in doing this. So when we take Herman and Chomsky's response into account, it might be a bit more valid to argue that the model, that we could criticize the model as being deterministic rather than a conspiracy theory. So when I talk about the propaganda model being overly deterministic, what I'm saying is that it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways. So because the commercial media is a capitalist enterprise, it is always going to act in the best interests of capitalism. Now, there are some examples that I've presented for us in this part of the module that suggest that that's not always the case, or although we might be able to continue to make that argument, it is, again, it's a bit more complex and a bit more complicated than that. The second criticism of the propaganda model is related to the idea of commercial media working as a conspiracy theory or working in a kind of conspiratorial relationship with business and government. And that second criticism is that media work is so diffuse, so busy, so chaotic that it couldn't possibly operate in the kind of conspiratorial way that Herman and Chomsky suggest. Media workers, media professionals certainly don't in any way consciously think in terms of the propaganda model when they go to work. Most media work is actually pretty mundane and often involves simply getting things done, meeting deadlines, filling out paperwork, doing all of those things. It is a job, just like any other job. So there's a lot of kind of stuff around the outside that cuts against the creative visions that many people would like to see fulfilled. And because of that chaos, because of that simultaneously chaotic and mundane nature of media work, there is actually little evidence of direct coercion of media professionals in their work. And if there was evidence of direct coercion, so editors or producers instructing content creators of any sort to tell a particular story in a particular way, you would know about it, or we as the public would know about it, because certainly that runs against the principles of press freedom and free speech, creative expression. So those moments of direct coercion where editors, producers force people to produce content that follows a particular political line, you would hear about it. And certainly there have been moments throughout this module where we've seen examples where people have claimed that they've been coerced to follow a particular political direction. Whether they're true or not is really not for us to decide, but they're there, but they're not everyday occurrences by any stretch of the imagination. Now, in response to this criticism, Chomsky and Herman argue that corporate control of media is structural rather than deliberate. So they go back and focus on one of the central pillars of the propaganda model by arguing that they never really said it's a conspiracy theory. That's not what they were setting out to demonstrate. Rather, they were arguing that the way corporate media is structured produces the flaws in the system that they're exposing. So media organizations hire people who fit their image of a good media professional. Now, that is common sense. You know, when you hire someone for any job, that person fits the company's vision of what a good worker is. So, you know, if News Corporation hires someone, they're hiring someone because they think he or she is a good fit for News Corporation. The ABC, SBS, Nine, Facebook, all do exactly the same thing. So that's a natural part of business. You hire people who you think fit the mold of your company. Most censorship in creative work involves self-censorship rather than direct censorship. So content creators, journalists, screen producers, writers are more likely to be inclined to shape their content in a particular way because that's what they think their boss wants rather than any direct pressure from the boss to produce the content in that way. Media formats, by their very nature, are incomplete versions of reality. So if you think about the inverted pyramid news story structure, that actually supports the use of official sources because the inverted pyramid structure for writing news stories requires us to put the most important information at the start of the story. So that inevitably leads journalists in many respects to go to those important official sources in order to fit the inverted pyramid structure. TV formats are also locked into specific time frames. You know, you have to make a half hour of television, you have to make a half hour of, you have to make an hour of television, whatever the format is, you're locked into that. So that is inevitably going to lead to things being trimmed, things being structured in a way that produces an incomplete version of reality.